Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
There is so much to say on the Yontif of Lag BaOmer because there is nothing said about the Yontif of Lag BaOmer. Meaning to say that there's a lot of mystery behind the day. What exactly is the celebration? What is the appropriate way to celebrate? What are we mechavein to? What do we have in mind? Is it anything more than just an opportunity not to say Tachnun? And the reason why there are so many different ideas from so many different perspectives is because we don't have any early sources that discuss what exactly the Yontif, if it is a Yontif, of Lag BaOmer is. Right? There's no discussion in Shas or Midrashim, anything relating to Lag BaOmer. The earliest sources we have go back to the 13th, 14th century, and we have descriptions and first-hand testimonies of great people in the 1400s and 1500s in Eretz Yisrael, speaking about the celebration of Lag BaOmer, and then we have many different theories. So we have in Shulchan Aruch the idea that the Mechaber and the Ramah speak about that Lag BaOmer was the day that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. And we've discussed that in the past. And we have probably the more prevalent idea behind Lag BaOmer, which is the Hilula de Rashbi. Right? We assume that Lag BaOmer is the yard site of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So before we jump into any particular idea of what the celebration is, I wanted to focus on some of the opposition, some of the concern that we find from different Gedolei Yisrael, primarily the Chasam Sofer. Also, we'll start off with the tshuva of the Shoel HaMeshiv. But they discuss their concern for how Lag BaOmer is being celebrated. Let's start with the Shoel HaMeshiv from Nathanson, one of the Poskei Hador of his time. He was a contemporary of the Chasam Sofer. He was born in 1762, passed away somewhere in the early to mid 1800s. Shoel HaMeshiv writes as follows. This is on page 1. I have a tamiyah, I have a kasha. If the celebration of Lag BaOmer is based on Hilula de Rashbi, it's the yard site of Shimon Bar Yochai, so then Adarabba, b'mos tzaddik v'chacham yesh lisanos. When a great person passes away, the appropriate response should be a tainus, like we find by Misas Tzaddikim in general. Heich nasa yontif. How do you make a yontif? Moshe Rabbeinu, who was even perhaps greater than the Rashbi, Zayin Adar for many is a tainus. V'ima Zohar kar Hilula de Rashbi. So you have a question. The Zohar does say it refers to this day as the Hilula de Rashbi. So at Hilula seems to be telling us there's some level of celebration. So says the Shoel HaMeshiv, Hainu lo. It's the Hilula de Rashbi. It was a celebration for the Rashbi. Di bevadai simcha lo shehalech lemenucha. There is a great joy that he himself experienced. If you recall, last year we went through some of that famous passage of the Zohar where it speaks about the last moments of the life of the Rashbi, and it seems that he was in a state of incredible joy as he was sharing the Sisrei Torah with his Talmidim. Shehalech lemenucha, avalo sonu ozav le'nacha. Maybe it's Hilula de Rashbi, because he was going to his ultimate resting place, but it's not a source of simcha or celebration for us. We lost the Gadol Hador. The truth is, I have a lot to say on this subject. There's a lot to discuss. Alma shenagu lisrof begadim alav belag BaOmer. There's a custom that within the bonfires they would throw in begadim and vehem ovrim al bal tashchis, says the Sholem Meshiv. Whatever explanation you're going to give as to where did the custom of throwing in clothing to the bonfires, but the Pashut Pshat is that's a violation of bal tashchis. You're wasting perfectly good items of clothing. Harbe yesh ledaber b'zeh. I have a lot to say on this. Uma asa, but what am I going to do? Ki b'vanasen harabim lo yishmu b'zeh lekol hamorim. Generally speaking, they're not going to listen to what the rabbis say. The Kavar Omru, Kishem Shemitzvah lo davar hanishma. And we know the Gemara in Yevamos tells us that just like it's a mitzvah to say something if you think it may be appreciated, it's also a mitzvah not to say something if you have a clear indication that no one's going to listen. And they add something very insightful. Ubefrat bedover shenogu v'choshvim hahamon shemitzvaheim osim. For sure, when it comes to something where many people are doing, and they're working with the assumption that we're being mekayim a mitzvah, shekosha lifrosh, then it's very hard to tell people to stop doing something that you assume is a mitzvah. V'Yisrael kadoshim v'rotim lezakos b'mitzvah. Klal Yisrael, we're holy people, and anything that looks like or feels like a mitzvah, we want to hold on to. Upshita shebimei ari b'shar kadoshim asher ba'aretz. Says the Sholem Meshiv, it seems clear to me though, if you were to go back a few hundred years, right? He's writing this in the probably early 1800s. Go back to the times of the Arizal in the 1500s. Lo hayu osim rak limud al kivro v'tfilos v'tachanunim. I guarantee you they weren't doing these types of celebrations. I assume the way the Ari and his chevra celebrated Lag BaOmer, it was through having a mishmar. Maybe they had cholent, they had davening by the kever, tachanunim. Ubiyom zeh yisor rachamim al Yisrael. And it was a day to try to awaken compassion on Klal Yisrael. Upshita shebeis Yosef v'siyato lo hayu manichem lasos kazos. And I would also assume it's pashut that the Beis Yosef and his chevra would not allow this kind of celebration to happen. V'rak acher kach nispashid aminig. I assume there was an evolution of these minhagim that took place after the time of the Arizal and the Beis Yosef. And then v'acher kach choshvu leminig kodum. And then when you press fast forward, and the Jewish people have been doing something for a few years, so then they might be working with the assumption that this custom is somewhat ancient, but it's not. And then he ends off by saying something so incredibly powerful, and this has nothing to do with how or why we celebrate Lag BaOmer, but it's a hashkafas haTorah. Always asking ourselves, what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu really want from us? Shim hayu lokchim oso momon. All of the money that's spent on some of these parties. V'hayu mefarsim aniyim Eretz Yisrael b'zeh. And you would take that money and instead of spending it on these gatherings, you would try to distribute it to those people impoverished in Eretz Yisrael. B'zeh sheyoser hayanicha l'rashbi v'hana lo dehana lo'olam. He said, trust me, you'd be giving the nachas to the Rashbi much more by taking all the money spent and giving it to Aniyah Eretz Yisrael. This is the truth of the Sholem Meshiv. Okay? So he's wondering out loud, why do we make a celebration on the yard side of a gadol? And you might say, because the Zohar says Hilul the Rashbi, it's a celebration of the Rashbi, but that just means for the Rashbi, it was a magical moment in time. That was his ascendance to Shemayim. But yard side for the rest of us here, we're still stuck in the Olam Hazeh. Yard side is a day of a tainus, not a day of a celebration. And the way it is celebrated, I'm not sure. Many of the minhagim that take place, where they come from, and if they're warranted. Now we get to the Chasam Sofer. So in 1837, we know there is a massive earthquake in Sfas in northern Israel. And it's estimated to be somewhere, for those of us who come from the West Coast, we know what earthquakes are on the Richter scale. It was estimated to be somewhere between 6.5 and 7, which is a significant earthquake, especially when you go back in time, hundreds of years, to a place like Tzfas, where you have massive hills and everything's built on top of each other. It was estimated that about 4,000 Jews perished in that earthquake of 1837, which was roughly half of the entire population of those areas, those three communities in Israel, Tzfas, Tiberia, and Meron. And that led to really the shutdown of those three communities. Many of those who survived moved to Yerushalayim and other places in central Eretz Yisrael. But as you can imagine, it was a tragedy that really shook the world. Now, the Chasam Sofer, when he speaks about the tragedy, he does something that we can never do. But he gives us a little bit of a glimpse, at least in his estimation, as to some of the cheshbonos, the darchei Hashem, behind this incredible tragedy. Madu asa Hashem kacha le'aretz hazos. Why did the Kadosh Baruch Hu do this? V'hayom hegienu michtav miYerushalayim hakadosha, Kadosh Hashem yedidenu Gaon Yisrael. Today, actually, I received a letter from my good friend, one of the Gedolei Hador, the author of the Pas HaShulchan, Rabbi Yisrael Shokolov, who was one of the Talmidim of the Gra. And in that letter, he writes two ideas, two suggestions as to what the Churban might have been connected to. And I just want to point out, whenever we find that Gedolei Yisrael are giving us any insight into a midah keneged midah, or why some level of onesh took place, they are never giving a reason as to why this yachid and this yachid, why were they the ones who were consumed by this fire or by this earthquake. It's an overall assessment, a bird's eye view of some level of the omek hadin. But obviously this is not answering the questions of every individual. But says the Pas HaShulchan, he wrote this in the Chasam Sofer, two ideas. Shechurban hagalil hazos, nivnu ala chazal b'mishnah, that the destruction of the Galil was prophesied in the Mishnah at the end of Masechta Sota, where it says that be'ikvisa de Mashiach Galil yecharev, during the times of Mashiach, the Galil will be destroyed. And I have no doubt, Ruach Hashem nosa bo v'yezeh nechama gedola. This is likely the fulfillment of that nevuah that's spoken about in the Mishnah at the end of Sota, and that should be some level of nechama for us, that this is part of the process of bringing the Geula. And the second thing the Pas HaShulchan said, Ki tola ched chorban halaz keched chorban bayis sheni. He assumed there is a connection between this destruction and the same reason the Gemara tells us why the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, was destroyed. Al sinas chinam. That shegam, shebnei Yisrael yofim heim. It's definitely true that those who live in Eretz Yisrael, they are precious, uplifted, holy Yidden. Nonetheless, we do find, because of the harsh conditions and the dachak, it leads to a sense of tension. She'ein beinehem shalom kolkach. And that was the second insight that the Pas Halechem shared with the Chasam Sofer as an idea behind this tragedy of the 1837 earthquake. The Chasam Sofer himself suggests the third reason. Ach lefi divrei Eliyahu zocher l'tov. Shreidas ha'aretz hu mikinas Yerushalayim ki tzadik Hashem Elokim. I assume there's an element here of the jealousy of Jerusalem. The jealousy that Jerusalem has over the focus and the attention that we're giving to Tzfas, Meron, Tiberia. V'kinas Yerushalayim osas azos. Kishom shar hashemayim. Yerushalayim is the shar hashemayim. Ir shechuvra lo yachtav, the Gemara in Taina says, it's the city that's connected directly heavenward. There we have Har Moriah, Kedes Yitzchak. There we have the Yaakov lie down and had the dream of the Sulam. There we have Har Beis Hashem. V'lo zozu Shechina mikosel maravi, and Chazal tell us that Hashem Shechina never leaves the kosel maravi. However, over the last century or so, if you take a look at what's going on in the Jewish people, Samu Paneim Litzvas, Kisham Kever Ish Eloki, Rashbi B'Meiron, all of the Jewish people are more enamored with the north. In Tzvas we have the Kever of the Arizal. We have the Rashbi in Meiron. V'cholo Olam L'Eretz Yisrael, Lo Samu Paneim Ele Litzvas V'Tiveria, Yerushalayim Nishkacha Legamre. And then Yerushalayim is forgotten about, as if it doesn't exist. And the truth is, we actually, Paskin writes the Chasam Sofer, that even nowadays, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, but there still is the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah of Ola L'Regel. Right? For Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, you could be Ola L'Regel by going to Yerushalayim. But instead, we find that there are Jews coming to Eretz Yisrael, and they're going to Svas, Lehilula de Rashbi. There's no interest in going to Yerushalayim for Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, but to go to Svas for the Hilula de Rashbi, that's on the forefront of their desire. Now the truth is, I've had a conversation with another good friend of mine, Rabbi Zalman Margolios, the great author of the Beis Ephraim, the Mata Ephraim. It's amazing just to hear, you have Gedolei Yisrael having these conversations with each other. Right? The Chasam Sofer having a back and forth with the Pasha Shulchan, another conversation with the Beis Ephraim. And what I shared, says the Chasam Sofer, with the Beis Ephraim, is that very similar to what we saw from the Shoel HaMeshiv. I don't understand why we're making a yantif over the yard site of the Rashbi. Zayin Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu is a tainus. There are many other times we have throughout our halachic literature where we have different tainesim based on the yard site of Nadav and Avihu, or Yeshua ben Nun, or Miriam. And he's bothered by the same question that the Shoel HaMeshiv was bothered by, that in the Zohar it refers to this day as the Hilula de Rashbi, the celebration of the Rashbi. And the Chasam Sofer has a very similar take as the Shoel HaMeshiv had, namely, Hilula de Rashbi, meaning that when a tzaddik comes to Shemayim, there's a celebration. But that celebration is in Shemayim, it's not a celebration here. Here we're in Avelis. Al Kol Panim, though, he concludes, Lo yadati ma mokum lehilula ula azov es Yerushalayim. So, in this piece of the Chasam Sofer, in his Sefer Torah Moshe, he's questioning the celebration in general, and it sounds like he's adding another layer of confusion, which is putting aside, why do we have a simcha party on the yard side of a gadol? His main focus is that I'm concerned this whole shift of priority that everyone is looking at Tzfas and Meiron as the Iker, neglecting Yerushalayim, that itself is a hashchosa, it's a corruption of Hashkafas HaTorah. And that, he said, might be one of the divine elements at play with the terrible tragedy that took place in the north.
Is there a Isser to leave Yerushalayim?
There is no Isser to leave Yerushalayim. I think he's pointing out from a hashkafic perspective that he feels that many people were missing the boat. They had their priorities off. Now again, I don't think he's saying, and that's why we fully understand the decision that Kadosh Baruch Hu made to take the lives of 4,000 people. As we mentioned, the Gedolim are pointing out connections. But that's the connection that the Chasam Sofer made. Yes?
Whether I want to tie this kind of into what happened a few years ago in Rome.
So we don't have the Chasam Sofer to give us any insight into that. And we don't have the right to say anything. It's a good question, though. But you need someone of the stature of the Chasam Sofer to have any divine insight. That's yes.
I'm still a little stuck on this. I don't really. I feel like I'm missing something. If it's not, if there's no halacha that you're over, then how are you supposed to know that that's a priority? Like it just doesn't. It seems like
So,
it would go in a lot of directions with this kind of logic.
So you're asking a good question, which is if there's no halacha, there's no official violation of not going to Yerushalayim, but instead of going to the north. So how can we expect people to know that what they're doing is inappropriate? It's a good question.
Or even what would Chasam Sofer say? I just don't.
Okay,
Why is it
valid.
not? Maybe it is a violation. Maybe it doesn't. Aren't there Gemara's psukim about specifically that you're supposed to always have your mind on the churban or whatever it is? Maybe that's a deviation from that. That by people going up there and dancing and singing and focusing on.
It could be. His main point, though, seems to be they're being machshiv Tzfas and Meron more than they're being machshiv Yerushalayim. Yeah.
He said it was a mitzvah.
Well, he was almost saying that as a, he's saying there's a mitzvah of being Ola the Regel. So instead, okay, but again, I don't think it's the halachic component of being mevatel, the mitzvah say, you didn't go to Yerushalayim. It's almost like the tuition committee. One second. You have enough money to go to Svas for Hilul Darashbi, but you can't afford to go to Yerushalayim for Pesach? I'm sorry, right?
You're saying that you also can't go to Yerushalayim if you're in Yerushalayim.
You can't go to...
Yerushalayim if you're in Yerushalayim. You can't be over. I was saying
Meaning if you live in Yerushalayim and I'm not going, okay, listen, I don't want to get into the weeds over here. Just pointing out what the Chasam Sofer was bothered by more than the celebration. It was almost a lack of focus or a lack of significance that we were giving to Yerushalayim.
In general, or specifically on Lag BaOmer that it was getting significance?
Well, it sounds like this was the indication that this became like the highlight of the year. You know, meaning if a person says, I have no interest in ever going to Eretz Yisrael for any yontif, for any celebration, davening at the Kosel, but Rosh Hashanah I go to Uman. Right? It could be like a similar feeling of you're not mechuyev necessarily to go to Eretz Yisrael, but I'm probably missing something, right? I want to go a little bit further. Yeah.
What would the Chasam Sofer say about Tachanun on Lag BaOmer? Does he still hold that it's a day that we would skip Tachanun?
Yes. And that Lemaisa we paskin, and we're going to see in this next piece also from the Chasam Sofer. This is probably the most famous piece we have. This is in the Tshuvas, in the Yeridea, where it's clear from the Shulchan Aruch, and he doesn't argue with that we skip Tachanun. So don't worry. We're still not going to say Tachanun. Yes.
I want to clarify, so the issue here isn't like selling spots. You have Ari, Sakaro, and they all sell different spots. The issue isn't selling that. The issue is looking at the focus.
Which I think is a good clarity, right? There is never an issue with these massive giants settling in Tzfas and making it a holy city. And all of the Gedolim, Chasam Sofer and the Sholem Meshiv included, would definitely say that Tzfas is Ir Kodesh. But it's not Yerushalayim.
Did the Rebbe address Dr. Sloan's question about like if it's not halachic, then how does that shift the project? How are we supposed to know?
Listen, there are many things that are not necessarily halachos, but you should have the priorities. The same way that if I have no interest in going to Eretz Yisrael, but I make sure to go to Uman every year, there's no halacha like that, but it's probably revealing a lack of a priority that I should have. Let's jump to the Chasam Sofer on page 3. This is in the Tshuvas. Again, addressing the celebration of Lag BaOmer. Amnam yadati ki shemati sha'achshav achshrei dari mimerchach yovo yidrosh es Hashem bir kodesh tzfas b'yom lamed gimel ba'omer b'hilul derash bizal. It seems like we have an uplifted generation where people are coming to be Daresh Hashem, and he's not saying that in any kind of sarcastic way. You know, the assumption, even with the Shoel Meshiv and the Chasam Sofer who are expressing concern with how it's being celebrated, it's clear that where it's coming from is a very pure and holy place. Yidden want to do mitzvahs and they want to connect with Ruchnius. V'im ki kol kavanasam l'shem shemayim, scharim rav bli safek. And because their kavanah is l'shem shemayim, everyone who is participating in this is receiving incredible reward. I have no doubt. Of mitam ze be'atzmo hayisi ani min aprushim. But that's why I'm going to stay away from that whole scene. Shelo it's tarich lios yoshev sham u'mishana min hagam bifneihem. Because if I were to go there and not participate, I would feel that's inappropriate. Right? Everyone else is getting involved with the celebration and I'm not. V'shelo ertze li'ischaber imahem bezeh. But on the other hand, I don't want to participate and join in these festivities because we already have the Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash writes in Siman Taf Tzadi Vav, he has a kuntris minhage iser, where he bemoans the fact that there are some places, some communities, where they create a holiday based on a miracle that took place in that community. Now, the truth is, there is an idea of making somewhat of a personal yontif. At the very end of the Sefer Chayei Adam, he speaks about this, that if a family or an individual goes through something and they experience nisim and clear hashkacha, to be koveya some level of yontif, you're allowed to do that and you're encouraged to do that in a personal way. You still say tachna though, I think. However, the Pri Chadash was saying for communities to be koveya, to establish this new precedent that, you know, this date every year is a yontif. He was concerned about that because you're creating something yesh me'ayin, like the Chasam Sofer famously said, chodesh aser min haTorah. We try not to innovate in ways that don't have clear sources in the Masorah. However, he says that likvoa moed shelo nasa bones. If the Pri Chadash was concerned about communities creating holidays for a miracle, what would he say about creating a holiday where a nes never happened, v'lo husker b'shas u'poskim b'shum makom, v'remez v'remiza, and there's no place in Shas and earlier poskim that speak about anything significant about Lag BaOmer. Rak minias hesped v'tainis. The only thing we find is that you're not supposed to give a hesped on Lag BaOmer. You're not supposed to fast. That minig we have v'tai magufa lo yodama. But even the reason for that minig is not clear. So what would the Pri Chadash say about establishing a yontif universally for all of Klal Yisrael when there was no miracle that ever happened and there's no allusion to this day being significant in Shas and Poskim? Mikol Mokom, says the Chasam Sofer, La'asoso yom simcha v'hadloka u'b'mokom yadua dafka. But to make a day of joy and lighting fires in a particular place, sheyetel talpio shehakol nifnim l'sham, that everyone ascends to Svas, lo yadati im rashoyim lasos kein. I'm not even sure if you're allowed to do that, to make it this level of yontif. And then he says something interesting. We know the Ramban wrote a famous letter to his son when the Ramban, towards the end of his life, went to Eretz Yisrael. So he writes to his son that as he was traveling different places through Eretz Yisrael, he noticed this dichotomy. Shekol makom mekudesh yoser mechavero, choru v'shomim yoser mechavero. The places that previously had more kedusha, now in their state of destruction, right? They were more desolate than other places that previously had less kedusha. So the Chasam Sofer suggests maybe b'avonosena harabim Adayin lo hagia arata zman binyano. We're not yet at the time to be zocha for the binyan Beis Hamikdash. And maybe this is all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's orchestration. Kidei shelo yisyashiv Yerushalayim b'yeser oz, ki lo zechinu l'kach. This is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan, where we're not yet ready to dwell in Yerushalayim. And maybe that's why there's somewhat of this shift of focus towards the north. But he concludes this tshuva by saying, I daven that I should be zocha to be part of Klal Yisrael as we make our way back to Yerushalayim, and not to be part of anything that might be extending the gullus that we're presently in. So here in the tshuva, he doesn't explicitly say what he mentions in the Torah's Moshe, right, where maybe the terrible tragedies were somehow associated with our giving more significance to Tzfas and Meron than Yerushalayim, but he's very much alluding to that concept here as well. And here he's saying maybe part of the divine plan of making it clear to us that we're not yet ready for the Beis Hamikdash and the Geula is having this shift of focus elsewhere outside of Yerushalayim. Okay, so if you were to ask the Chasam Sofer, the question?
Yeah, I mean, he's making the point that no miracle actually happened on this day, but we actually have multiple miracles that happened on this day. One is the 24,000 students who were going to stop dying. That was pretty major for the Israel. Also, the mud started to fall on this day.
Oh, okay. So Dr. Sloan has read this Chasam Sofer before. Okay, okay. Okay. Okay, that's impressive. So the question is, don't we have many documented miracles that took place on the 33rd day of the Omer, namely the 18th of Iyar? So we know what's mentioned in the poskim. That was the day that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. The question is that a miracle? What?
Is it a pause or a stop?
It's a good question. The way it's said in the poskim, Pashup Pshat will assume they stopped dying on that day.
For some reason, people still do Avelis afterwards.
Ayin Shom V'du Ketiv.
They stopped dying, but they stopped dying.
Oh, right.
Do we have a source for that?
Yeah.
A source for this?
The Ramah brings
Where
it.
did he get it?
Ayin Shom.
I don't know.
Ayin Shom. From earlier poskim. But Pashup Pshat, we wouldn't view that as a miracle. Right? And this is really the Pri Chadash in that siman on Taf Tzadi Gimel. He has his famous question, which is, the fact they stopped dying, why is that a source of celebration? The reason they stopped dying was not based on intervention, the divine intervention. It was based on the fact they were all dead. Right? Meaning, at that point, they were decimated. Like that was the hashlama, that was the completion of the tragedy. But Pashup Pshat, we wouldn't view that as a miracle, and that is the question of the Pri Chadash, right? How is that cause for celebration? Question?
I have a question. If all the Talmidim were dead, weren't there 4 left of the Talmidim that were not dead? So how come they didn't die? Were they not counted?
Oh, so that's a good question. David's asking, how about the new Talmidim that Rabbi Akiva had? So the way the Gemara says it is they weren't part of that yeshiva. It's after all of his Talmidim perished, so then he traveled to the south and he found 5 new Talmidim, right? And he had the continuity of Torah Shebaal Peh.
That's part of what we're celebrating, no?
So that's what the Pri Chadash answers. The Pri Chadash answers that maybe the focus is not just on the fact they stopped dying, but it's more looking forward that he was able to cultivate 5 new Talmidim and continue the Shalshelis HaMasorah. What's that? Yeah, listen, there are many sources. The Chida in a few places speaks about different Masorahs that he's seen in his travels as to what took place on Lag BaOmer. It could be that the Rashbi was actually given smicha on Lag BaOmer. There was something special about that day. But we don't find explicitly nisim that took place. Now, Dr. Sloan did mention, how about the falling of the mun? Now, this is interesting because in this tshuva where the Chasam Sofer is expressing real opposition to the way Lag BaOmer is celebrated, he does say that It could be based on Chazal. Where this Chazal is not quoted, so it's not so clear. All right, this is the last paragraph on page 3. He says, "Lefi de'isa b'medrash shebiyom shekala hacharara shotzi mimitzrayim," on the day that our bread, meaning our matzah we had with us, ran out. So we had that matzah for 30 days. Then halchu gimel yamim below lechem. Then we went 3 days without bread. V'achar kach yored haman. And then afterwards, 3 days later, right, the man descended from Shemayim. So it comes out according to this Chazal that horedes haman b'yom lamed gimel ba'omer. According to this calculation, right, we left on Tesvav Nisan, and we had our matzah with us for 30 days. And then we went 3 days without any food, it sounds like. So that's really Gemara and Shabbos. Now the Maisa, this Chazal that the Chasam Sofer is quoting, is that the man didn't come directly after the matzah was finished, but there was a 3-day gap, and we had to eat vegetables during those 3 days. But then the man came 3 days later, meaning that would come out Yud Ches Iyar. So v'roi lasos lezeh zeicher tov, and therefore it's appropriate to make some level of remembrance for the miracle of the descending of the man that, according to this Chazal, took place on Lag BaOmer. Achu neged Shas. Only problem is this Chazal seems to be in contrast to a Gemara we have in Shabbos, where the Gemara seems to say that the man actually came a few days earlier. Okay. I want to focus on this for a moment, though. Let's assume, like the Chazal, that the man fell on the 33rd of the Omer, which was the 18th of Iyar, and now we have a precedent that there was an incredible miracle that took place on Lag BaOmer. I would still have the question, right? There were many incredible miracles that took place throughout the Midbar. And we don't find special holidays, even quasi-holidays, without Tachnun and Hesped and Tainus, where we're celebrating all of the incredible Nisim that happened. When the Ananei HaKavod came initially, there are many things that happened, the Ber Shel Miriam. So what's special about the Man that this is a cause of celebration?
Why wasn't it celebrated for 2,000 years? You know, it wasn't a yontif.
Right, meaning that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't think it was worthy of being a yontif, it was never established in the Psukim. Right, meaning that it's hard to deny that if you were to ask anyone, and this has been the assumption of the Chasam Sofer and the Shoel HaMeshav and everyone else, that there's something about Lag BaOmer that's connected to Hilul D'Rashbi. They had questions how it's celebrated, but the man seems to have nothing to do with Hilul D'Rashbi. That's one strange thing. There's another strange thing here, which is, however we understand the simcha element of Lag BaOmer, do we view it as like a little island unto itself? There's something about Lag BaOmer that has nothing to do with the time period that we're in. It's not connected at all to Sfiras Omer and leading up to Matan Torah, just its own little thing. You know, it happens to be we have Yom Ha'atzmaut within this period. So, okay, we also have Lag BaOmer. I don't know. That's also strange. It would feel more mistaver. It would feel more reasonable if part of the celebration of Lag BaOmer that we have during Sfira was somewhat connected to the process of Sfira and building towards Ma'amad Har Sinai. So I want to share with you, there are two memras, two statements that we have from none other than Reb Shimon Bar Yochai himself, where he speaks about the significance of the man. So we have a Mechilta, and this is brought in a few different places in the Midrashim, where the pasuk in Parshas B'Shalach tells us that when the man started coming from Shemayim, v'yotza'am v'loktu devar yom b'yomo, that the nation would go out and they would collect whatever it was for that day, And the reason for that was Leman Anasenu Hayelich B'Tarasim Lo. As a challenge, as a nisayon, are we going to stay true to the Torah or not? So Mikan Haya Reb Shimon Bar Yochai Omer Lo Nitna Torah Lidrosh Ele Le'ochle Haman. And this is a famous line, that the Torah was given only to those who were Ochle Haman, who were able to consume the man. HaKetzad Haya Yoshe V'Doresh V'lo Hayodeh Meichen Ochel V'Shosa. He would be learning and he would be teaching, and he would not know where the next meal was coming from. Umeheichen Haya Lovish Umiskasa, or where his clothing would come from. Halo Nitna Torah Lidrosh Ele Le'ochle Haman. So it sounds like that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is saying the fact that the man was Devar Yom Biyomo, it was a daily occurrence, and that the pasuk itself is revealing to us was in order to create this ongoing nisayon for Klal Yisrael. What was that nisayon? The fact that it was Yom Biyomo?
Nothing for the next day.
Right. L'maisa, it's very hard to eat everything you have now and having nothing left in front of you. It requires that ongoing yearning and bitachon and confidence that I'm going to have more tomorrow. And even though I might know it intellectually, because that's been the system now for many days or years, but that's an ongoing nisayon. Lo nitna Torah ele le'ochle haman. So it sounds like it was going through that nisayon of the man that made Klal Yisrael worthy or ready, right, for Matan Torah. Now we have a second memra of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and this is a Gemara. The Gemara in Yuma says, Shalu Talmida ves Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that the disciples of the Rashbi asked him the following question: Mipnei ma lo yored lahem liyisrael man pamachas b'shana. Why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu just every year, Rosh Hashanah time, send a whole massive shipment of man, and they would just take what they needed for their daily existence? And even if it was only a certain amount, so tell them, only take this much, but at least you have everything there. So Amr Lahem, the Rashbi, said to his Talmidim, Emshu lechem mashal. I'll share with you an analogy. You have a melech basar v'dam sheyesh lo ben echad. Sounds kind of familiar. This mashal comes up a few places, right? A king that has a son. Pasuk lo mizonosa pamachas b'shana, and he wants to help his son out. You know, he's newly married, still learning in Kollel, so he has two options. He could either give him, listen, I understand, based on rent and other expenses, and this is the deal that I made with my mechutin. I'm going to give half, he'll give half. Okay. So basically, my acharayas towards you is I have to give you $50,000 a year. I could either write you a check at the beginning of the year. Then what happens? So then it's a wonderful thing that once a year the son comes over, nice smile, they have breakfast, he receives the check and says, okay, thank you so much, I'll see you next year. However, if his father says, listen, I want to help you out, and I'm going to give you money continuously, then v'haya makil panei aviv kol yom. So then it's a different relationship. He needs his father every day, so they'll have an ongoing connection. Said the Rashbi to his Talmidim, Af Yisrael, mi sheyesh lo arba v'chamisha banam hayadoeg v'omer. A person who has children, he might be concerned and say, Shema lo yored man lamachar. Maybe the man might not fall tomorrow. Now it's interesting, the focus is on children. Right? Why did the Gemara just say, for oneself? The man might not fall tomorrow, and what am I going to do? My theory is because when it comes to children, that's where you awaken the real daiga. Meaning, I've been living through the miracle day in and day out, but lamaisa, if I don't see I have anything right here in front of me, there's nothing in the fridge right now, nothing in the cupboards in the kitchen. Where it hits me is my instinctual concern for my kinder. What am I going to feed them tomorrow? That's a visceral hargasha that the intellect doesn't really help with. So nimtzu kulam mechavnim es libam lavim shebeshamayim. And because of that concern, there was an ongoing experience where every member of Klal Yisrael was mechavein libo la'avim shebeshamayim. Now, this Chazal and this Gemara seem to be very complementary. They seem to be explaining each other. And the Kedushas Levi says that exact point. He says what's happening here is that we're learning a hashkafa. That when the Chazal and the Rashbi said, quoted in the Mechilta, that lo nitna Torah lidrosh ela la'ochlei haman, the idea is, if we have too much of a sense of confidence, and there's a sipuk hanefesh, we don't need anything. Baruch Hashem, it's true, ein kemach, ein Torah, but if there's no concern whatsoever, we have storehouses of kemach, that itself is also ein Torah, because there's no sense of an ongoing need for a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what the Gemara in Yuma says when it quotes the Rashbi as well. This mashal of why Hashem had to do it every day. In the words of the Kedushas Levi, he says, "V'gam yodashu nitzrach elav v'lisle midilei klum." The idea here is that we come to a recognition that without a Kadosh Baruch Hu, we mamish have nothing. There's no such thing as a chazaka, as a status quo. Baruch Hashem, I'm healthy, financially things are going well, I'm getting a paycheck. That's not the way the world works. Every bracha that I have is an ongoing bracha. Oh, okay, that's a shmooze. V'zehu inyan nami shenosan Hashem yisbarach shefa b'chol yom. This is not limited to the experience of the midbar, of having man descend every day, but it's the whole existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being mashpia life in every moment. Kadesha neda sha'anu tzrichem elav tamid. It's just to reinforce that belief that we need you every second. Now, why does Hashem want that? So says the Kedushas Levi, V'zehu bishvil avas habore baruchu sherotze lehishtasheya im Yisrael banav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like a father, like a mommy, wants to be connected with his children. Ka'av mi beno, and there's a hana, there's a pleasure, whatever that means when we're speaking about the Borei Olam, but there's a hana Kadosh Baruch Hu has, there's a nachas, that we're constantly involved with him. Ulechein yishlach lo hashefa chiyunis midei yom v'yom kedei sheneda she'anu tzrichim elav b'chol yom b'chol eis u'b'chol sha'ah. Says the Kedushas Levi, this is the understanding of what we learn in the Mechilta, and this is also the idea of what the Gemara in Yuma is teaching us. The lesson of the man is that we need you every moment of our lives, and therefore there's an ongoing relationship. Why does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want that ongoing relationship? It's the same way a father wants that connection with his child. How is that beneficial for us? That's what life is all about, living with an awareness that everything is within the presence of Hashem. So it's interesting, if the Chasam Sofer is suggesting that maybe the Yontif of Lag BaOmer is we're celebrating when the mun began to fall, these Chazal from the Rashbi himself might give us some insight into, first of all, why is that miracle different than other Nisim that took place? Was it a greater miracle than other things that were supernatural in the Midbar? The answer is no. But this was a significant step towards Maimed Har Sinai. The fact that it falls out in the middle of Sfiras Omer is likely not a coincidence. Right? We happen to have a Yontif celebrating Yeridas Haman during Sfiras Omer. If the Rashbi himself is telling us that the whole lesson of the Mun, what we're celebrating, with this nace, and really, according to the Kedushas Levi, it's a celebration of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mashpia, is pouring on that shefa every moment of life. This is the requirement, this is the hakara, the recognition that we need to get to a point where we can be makabel Torah. Torah needs a relationship with Hashem. It can't be void of that relationship. Now, the goal of the Torah is Kuchabricha Raisa Yisrael Chad, that the Torah is the vehicle to enhance that relationship. But at the same time, there's a hachana, there's a preparation of making sure that we have that ongoing feeling of need and connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, how does that tie into the Hilula de Rashbi? Right? So we saw last year, we're not going to repeat it this year, but we saw last year that famous part of the Zohar where it seems clear the celebration was not the fact that he passed away. We were mourning. And we actually have in the Zohar there the incredible, the tsar and the pain that his close Talmidim felt. The celebration was that infusion of light, of the Sisrei Torah and incredible ideas that came into the world, which was also a continuity of the Shalshelas HaMasorah. So the idea of needing Hashem every day, working up to Maimid Har Sinai, and the idea of celebrating the insights and the continuity of the Torah through that Torah that was shared with us on this special day. And likely, like we said from the Pri Chadash, even the notion of all of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passing away, but at the same time, we had the Hamshacha, we had the continuity of the Masorah. There's definitely a common theme we find within the many different flavors or colors that describe Lag BaOmer. What the Chasam Sofer is saying is that he doesn't feel some of the celebration is warranted. Others defend the celebration, like we mentioned the Chidah in many places. And obviously, like everything in life, do whatever your Masorah is. If that's what your mishpacha does, you have music and bonfires in Lag BaOmer, then go for it and enjoy it. But the ultimate goal is whatever you're doing to celebrate, it should be with the focus. It's a celebration of the continuity of Torah. It's a celebration of needing Hashem every day to build up to our own Kabbalah Satorah. Okay? Shkoyach.